we as humans, we are visual animals, and we often overlook the power that some shapes, some movement, and some colors can impact our decision.
Sometimes when you think of animation, you think of like Disney and kids movies and things like that. But when it comes down to it, you see animation all the time. Every day you see animation, and it's a really powerful tool. So I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Jose, would you ever say no to a job? Like, would you ever say like, no, I don't think you should do an animation? Hi, and welcome back to the DigiVlog. I am Alyssa Baker. I'm a senior video producer with DigiVidBIO, and today I'm joined by our animation team leader, Jose. And as you know him, Adam Mariner, one of our video team members who also supervises our post-production. So we're going to be talking a bit about the application of animation for businesses in the healthcare and life sciences spaces. How to know when animation makes sense for a project that you're working on. I'm looking forward to diving into it. Before we get started, let's do some quick introductions. So Jose, if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into the animation space, and what your role has been with your time here with DigiVidBIO.
Absolutely. Thank you, Elisa. Thank you, Adam. It's a pleasure being here, finally. I have over 15 years of experience into animation and graphic design. And before that, I've been into the arts in the music industry. And I'm just love putting things into motion, right? So I will just love things that connect, that have a messaging. And this is what I've been doing in the past 15 years. In the past 15 years, I've been able to work with different companies in the Fortune 500, technologies and life science and medical spaces. And I have been witnessing firsthand on how animation can impact these fields.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then Adam, if you don't mind just giving a little bit of, who are you inside of the DigiVidBIO family?
I know you guys see me a lot in these episodes, but I would just say, the first time I took an animation class in college, it really showed me the power of animation. It's a super powerful medium. But sometimes when you think of animation, you think of like Disney and kids movies and things like that. But when it comes down to it, you see animation all the time. Every day you see animation, and it's a really powerful tool. So I'm looking forward to talking about it and hearing what Jose has to say, because he's a super talented guy. So I'm looking forward to this episode.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm sure the feeling is mutual.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to hop into the first questions for Jose. Jose, when you're looking at a new project, what makes you think yes, okay, animation's the right call here?
Absolutely. So when we first get a project, we try to see what is the idea that we're trying to communicate. So essentially, what is the the core message that we're trying to communicate? It usually is just one. And depending on when we decide on when we find out exactly what the client needs to communicate, we decide it is a good fit for animation or other mediums. For instance, sometimes clients come to us with a very abstract messaging, and those are the places that animation could be a really good fit. Other times, it's just an explaining a technology that is probably could be super complicated to represent on a live action, or a procedural animation, for instance, like an operation or a surgery. That those could be also really hard and complex and costly to put into live action means. So those are where an animation could probably be a better fit in those cases.
Yeah, I know that Adam, you probably have some experience with this because you've shot procedural as well. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the logistics that don't always fall into place that you feel would contribute to a business deciding that animation just is more convenient or more cost efficient?
Yeah, there's definitely circumstances, especially in the biomedical space, where maybe you have a piece of technology that runs at a certain speed and is within a housing, for example. And once you have that, it's hard to get a camera inside, right? And maybe it's a piece of equipment that it has to be closed to operate, and I can't put a camera inside there. What's great is you have CAD designs, you have all your engineering designs when you come up with a new piece of equipment. In this example, these designs could be sent over to a graphics department, to someone like Jose, where they can simplify the technology concepts and give a really clear explanation of how things work. And so that's why I think animation is super powerful, because it can take something that's difficult for me on set to film and create this virtual space that allows the audience to fully understand. Because you got to think, like, I kind of think of animation like it's a language, right? You're taking things that sit still, that really, an image can give you a lot of explanation, but as soon as that image starts to move and that movement becomes part of the language, explaining to you how things move, how they interact with other things, it's really a beautiful way to help your audience understand. And I think the other space where it's really great is when you have, say, for example, a patient, and you're explaining complex medical circumstances, whether it's like how things are diagnosed, how a disease functions, or how a cure or a surgery, for example, impacts the disease to improve the patient outcomes. Those are complex, and like I can't put a camera inside someone's stomach, for example. So using someone like Jose, where you can sit down and talk about this is how it works, and here's an example of how it works, and let me draw it out for you or whatever. That can translate into this language that now your patient understands it really, really well. So for me, it's a way for me to go, all right, here's your goal. Like Jose was saying, like, here's what you want to communicate. Where can I use a camera and where can't I? And that's where I'm like, all right, animation would be amazing in this space, is to communicate this thing that I can't really communicate efficiently with a camera. Let's have Jose communicate it the right way with animation.
Yeah, I think that creating understanding is a really great use for animation, and you both kind of spoke to that a little bit. Another thing that occurs to me, though, inside of this space is even also just like the tone that you want to set and the space you're creating for your audience. So you specifically mentioned, Adam, speaking to patients. And I think that we know that for most people, going to a hospital environment or to a doctor's office can be really intimidating, especially depending on like certain specialties and practices when you're dealing with extremely complex or sensitive forms of care, right? Like I think of the oncology space as a really good one. Like someone who's just gotten a diagnosis, it can be very intimidating, and it can be so clinical in a way where you just feel this like loss of control over your life and your treatment and the path that you're on. And I mean, we listen to patients time and time again tell these stories and how difficult it is going in and talking to countless doctors. And so if you can create like a safe space for them by illustrating these concepts and helping them feel at home, I think that can be accomplished really well with animation, because we're able to build original environments and characters and illustrate these concepts in a way that is a little detached from the actual medical spaces that can be very intimidating for patients, if that makes sense. So for sure, creating better understanding, knowledge, giving access to visuals that you can't illustrate. Like I think SaaS is also like a really great application, right? Like we have a lot of clients in the either app or software development spaces for healthcare, those are things that are happening in a digital space that's really impossible to illustrate. I think that access is another factor. So, Adam, you hit on it a little bit about when we're in procedural spaces, obviously getting access to things you wouldn't. So Jose, can you give a specific example of a piece of content or a project that you worked on where you felt like choosing to go the route of animation created better access, whether that's for patients or healthcare providers, to the piece of information that you're illustrating in that format?
Absolutely. So we have one on the top of my head that is Helix, where we wanted to, what the goal was to communicate what genetic testing is and all of its intricate like journey from the moment of just explaining what genetic testing is up to the point of the regulatory government statal each by state laws. And that was a nice project since animation helped us translate all of that complex subject that is genetic testing to patients that could understand that easily. So that is a beautiful piece that we did together, and I'm sure that without animation, communicating all of that would have been one, costly, and two, extremely difficult to achieve, and probably just wary to the viewer just seeing it otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, you specifically mentioned like watching a process and the role that the government plays in it as well. And it's interesting because I imagine like Adam, as someone who's done a lot of documentary work, you understand like the complexities and nuances of like filming when you're talking multiple locations and especially like working with government entities or to execute on that. Can you talk a little bit about like what are some of the logistics that go into the execution of live action production that really have a bearing on cost and why it might be effective to make the decision that, you know, in this scenario, animation is actually the more affordable route to take?
Yeah, and I think the two things to keep in mind is many times these conversations need to happen in pre-production primarily because it may not, right? You may get a better result from animation, but it may not save you a lot of money because one of the things that comes up is say you're explaining some kind of process like we had with that one client Jose was talking about, where you're explaining government processes. Now you could use stock footage, but then you're limited to stock footage and you might not get exactly what you want. And you're trying to explain how laws are passed or how regulations are created. And visually, it just doesn't connect if it's just like someone walking down the hallway or someone writing on a piece of paper while a voiceover is going. It's just not connecting because what you're seeing isn't directly related to what you're supposed to be learning. When animation comes in, you get to have that. You get to see exactly what you need to learn. So you see it and you hear it at the same time. It helps you retain the information. It's really good for an audience. That being said, to answer more directly your question, I may not be able to sit down with a lawyer, for example, who's a medical lawyer, and they may have some kind of fees, talent fees that they're used to, right? Because you want to hire, say, a talent lawyer that specializes in TV and video explanation. That's all well and good. You can totally do that. Or you can hire a voiceover artist for a fraction of the price, transition some of that budget over to animation, and now you're getting like a really detailed, instructional but entertaining video out of it without the cost of like the lawyer, for example. And you have to keep in mind, if you do hire that lawyer, there's a chance that they don't want to film in their office. So then where are you going to film? And you might have to get a studio. So there are costs where I want to emphasize that like there could be some costs eliminated to reduce budget, but keep in mind too that cost may be best used to transition some of that over to animation so that assets are properly created and there's more time in the animation process to make sure that everything's explained well. All those things kind of go into affecting the budget. But again, yeah, if you're filming on set, you have to have a crew on set, you have to have talent on set. If it's a qualified talent, for the example that we're using, then that talent's more expensive. So there's a lot of things that go into filming that aren't needed in the animation process.
So I will talk a little bit more about the factors that contribute to measuring or determining cost for animation. But before we hop into that, Adam, you also hit on something I think really pertinent when it comes to conversations about deciding to use animation, and that's engagement. Like ultimately everything that a marketer is creating is with the intention to engage the audience and create conversion, right? So I do think that when we talk about the use of animation as a tool to foster more engagement, there's this really common myth, and I know I've heard it a billion times. I don't know if you guys have heard this, but how often have you had someone say something to the effect of, "Oh, well, cartoons are for kids. You know, my audience isn't going to connect with that," right?
All the time. All the time. But then they watch animations every single day and they don't realize it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. So Jose, I'm curious speaking to someone who thinks that they're targeting like a highly intelligent demographic, an older demographic who have this myth in their head that, oh, animation is going to turn off my audience. Like, what would you say to help someone who has that belief system?
Absolutely. So on that end, I think that we as humans, we are visual animals, and we often overlook the power that some shapes, some movement, and some colors can impact our decision. And every day, without us noticing, our life has been impacted by those type of things without noticing that. So I would say that sometimes it's even a better tool to use an animation that is just a simple concept of, for example, two circles moving from one side to another, and that drives more connection and more empathy and more clients and more ROI that probably just try to convey that with a live action, depending of the case, of course. So those will be my inputs on that subject.
Yeah, I'm curious to know too from both of you, and I'll direct this to Adam first, but generally, how do you differentiate between motion graphics and animation? Like, what's the difference between those two things in your mind?
So for me, it's like the umbrella and then the categories, right? So the umbrella term would be animation. That would be like, oh, I want a video that's animated. And then within animation, it's several different styles of animation. So motion graphics would be one of them. That's really heavy on like iconography. It tends to be many cases visually 2D, even though it may be animated in 3D space. It's a 2D feel. And then you get into traditional animation, which is like the 90s Disney classics, right? So it looks drawn, it's very organic looking. And you have 3D animation, which feels more like a Pixar, right? And you have character animation where it's people moving. So all of these different styles can play to different needs, whether it's a clinical feel, an emotional appeal, an educational, all of these things. And then that also interacts with live action a lot of times, right? There's times where we film things and in the editing process, we know the needs that Jose has in the animation, and then we send him our live action edit and he fills in the animations. And so all of these things kind of interact to determine what kind of animation we should do. So if you're in neurology, for example, so animation is like the dementia term, and then the different types of animation would be like the specific diagnosis of Alzheimer's.
Yeah, that's awesome. Jose, do you have anything you want to add to that on the for edification for marketers who maybe don't know the separation between those two things?
I think Adam just put it beautifully. It's just like another flavor of animation. We have different flavors, and now we have a new one on the blog, which is AI animation. But it's just really another just taste of what animation could do.
Yeah. What role do you feel like AI is playing in animation today, and what impact specifically? I mean, the healthcare space is, I think, one space where we're seeing AI growing really rapidly, and it's almost like I mean, Adam and I travel to healthcare conferences all the time, and we know that like the word AI is just this hot button thing that's pushed around all over the place. Like, what impact does it have on animation for the healthcare space?
Well, the impact is just super significant because now with AI we have the potential to scale faster, to propose new things, to lower scopes and budgets, to explore mood boarding way earlier in the processes. We can just create, for example, stock footage, particularly for a specific client with a specific set of needs. Also, that drive animation to enhance or just 2D animations, enhance them to give more value for a similar rate. So there are really just countless places where AI is enhancing just the healthcare space in just the animation. Just talking about the animation side, of course.
One of the things that I really am excited for when it comes to AI and animation is the opportunity for, at an affordable rate, reaching out and adding to the pacing of like what I do in live action. So the quick explanation on what I mean by that, there's two kind of principles when it comes to post-production editing. There's speed and there's pacing. So speed would be like how fast something moves on screen. So think in terms of like that circle Jose was talking about earlier, moving across screen. It's just how much time does it take for the circle to go from the, say, right to the left of screen, and that's it. But pacing is how is the story rolling forward? And is the pacing correct to keep the audience's attention? Because fundamentally, when we come with medical marketing, we're using this thing I like to call edutainment, right? We're educating them on your product, your process, your diagnostic test, whatever it is, but we're entertaining them along the way so we maintain their attention. And pacing is a big deal. And so there's opportunities for me to film something, the story's right, the pacing's right, but there may be moments where I'm like, man, we never had an opportunity to get B-roll, but this is a really important thing to understand. Within budget, since I'm not having to edit B-roll and color B-roll and export B-roll, there may be an opportunity for me to reach out to Jose and say, hey, using AI, can I just get this? And he can go yes or no. And then we can keep the highest quality of video production within budget for each one of our clients. And that's what I see AI doing. It's really just giving us more tools to be more efficient in what we're already doing. And then the one caution that I think every client needs to keep in mind is that the eye matters, the artist's eye. And so the reason why I would still reach out to Jose and not necessarily just do it myself, even though I have that eye, is because the collaboration between him and I allows us to see it as artists and go, okay, there's nothing wrong with it. You know, and if your audience feels like it's not real, then you're working in a space where you're like, it gets uncomfortable. Yeah. So that's what's really important, I think, is when we utilize this new tool, that we utilize it with the right framing, the right opportunities, right? So whether or not it's the right choice, and then with the right eye on the back end to go, this looks right, it feels right, it fits both our speed on screen and our pacing in the story. And so I'm looking forward to AI, but again, it's like a race car driver and a car. It's like I could get into that car and crash into the wall. It's so powerful, it's so fast. I'm just not used to that power, but and AI is very powerful. But it's like when you put a race car driver, a trained driver in the seat of that car can do amazing things. And that's kind of what I see AI doing, is in the hands of the right people, right artists, the right eye, it's going to do incredible things. So
yeah, I also would say, like, to that point, for sure there are elements that I think AI still doesn't have perfected, that you kind of have to coach it or train it up on, like whether that's like reprompting it or going in and doing some manual work on the back end with the assets that it builds. But even beyond that, it's also just like the time and effort you want to put into it, because I think a lot of marketers who decide they're going to go, build their own stuff with AI, I think what they learn really quickly is that even though it does save time comparative to the traditional methods of building animation, it's still kind of a time suck compared to you not doing it at all, right? Like if you're someone who that's not part of your job and not what you were doing before, and then you're trying to like learn how to use something like a Midjourney, like it's the learning curve of just getting into the program and figuring out how to do the right prompts to facilitate the content that I want and how to use the program properly. But it's also like on any individual project, the time and effort that goes into like reprompting and then cleanup. And if you're not an animator, not knowing how to use tools like After Effects or, even from a like asset graphical department, right? Like working with, Illustrator or Photoshop or other programs to like finesse the visuals, like lacking that skill can make it really difficult to leverage AI to its full capacity. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about AI, and we've mentioned it many, many times. We've talked about value and cost and the impact. And I know that it's a big intimidation for a lot of marketers, is cost and what's going to make sense financially. We talked about ways in which you can balance, like making sure that using animation is a good fit for your budget. But I'd love to talk a little bit more about the resources that contribute to cost. So Jose, especially for some of the smaller businesses that you've worked with in the past, what are some of the things that, they bring to the table that help mitigate cost when it comes to building an animation, or things that, a lot of people need your help with that can like sneak up on them and contribute to like rising cost of a project?
Mm-hmm. One important and super important thing that comes to mind is just brand guidelines, right? So many of our clients just come with an already built up, well set of brand guidelines, which make our job way easier, right? But they do not have those. So like having a really nice set of real visual guidelines help us like bring down the cost, like prevent future revisions, like keep us in line with some aesthetics and with the mission, the visual mission of the company. So everything I think will reduce to understanding the visual communication that each of our clients has.
So I totally agree with that statement, and I do think that branding is a key component in consistency of your message, like to your audience and hitting the right people over and over again. But I'm also wondering, because there's such a diversity of animation, like, do you feel like as a marketer, if I am pursuing animation and I'm thinking about the future of the role it plays in my business, is there a limit on how much variety that you can build into your image with animation? Like, do you feel like as a brand, it benefits you or behooves you to kind of pick a tone and stick with it? Or is there room for a brand to have multiple pieces of animated content in different styles and formats and it still work cohesively?
Absolutely. So essentially, it all depends on the messaging that we would trying to communicate, right? So there are many different brands that have like different flavors of their own brands, and that's where we can have like different set of animations. We can even have like a combination of a 3D on one section, 2D and explainer on one another, and also combining live action with animation. So it really depends on the messaging that we're trying to communicate. There's essentially like limitless options on our behalf, but none of them like works for each of the messages that we're trying to communicate. So knowing exactly what to pick, when to pick it, why to pick it is crucial when we're trying to drive and communicate said message.
Yeah. I know, Adam, you and I collaborate a lot with clients on the pre-production end of things. So can you speak a little bit to like some of the resources that a client might choose to bring to the table that contribute to, even before you've started the actual animation process, like contribute to the pre-production for an animated project?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I know that sometimes when we're in meetings, it's difficult when you add extra people, right? Because you're just like scheduling the meeting and all that stuff. But it really does save a lot on the back end in the revision process. You can avoid, going out of scope and how much time you're spending going back and forth with the right people in the meetings on the front end in the pre-production calls. And so a lot of times what we will request is if we're doing, say, a 2D style motion graphic animation with a lot of iconography. Yeah, it would be good to have your marketing team person who's in charge of graphic design, the people who are making your flyers already, making imagery for your website, right? Who may have put together the entire branding guidelines visually and knows from the feedback of all of the marketing people what goes into those branding guidelines because they built them, right? And so having that person in there who's going to make the iconography speak to how it's made, what colors they are, and to hear feedback from the animators, so like Jose, these are the kind of assets we need. This is the format we need them in. And discuss how they can move forward. Because what could happen, unfortunately, is on the back end, if these things change on the back end and they've already been animated, many times it's easier. And Jose, you can tell me if maybe I'm just doing it wrong, but many times when I've come up to that space, it's just easier to just delete the icon or the graphic altogether and start over, right? Because it's new layers, each layer is animated, and they're animated separately. So it's important to have those people on the front end so that they know what kind of assets we need to get, when we need to get them, how the assets could be organized, and what file formats that we need in those assets. And so that's an example of someone who should be in the meeting, who then will be delivering assets to us directly and working more closely with us. The middleman, despite every effort that we make, you guys make to communicate really well, there still can be loss in translation sometimes. The other person I think is, at least in one of the conversations, if available, is where the buck stops. The person who's actually going to say, yes, I approve this video. Sometimes that person's very busy, right? If you're a startup and you only have 5 employees, sometimes it's the founder of the company. It's really hard to get them on the call. But if they are the ones that are going to make the final say, then maybe in the last meeting before animation starts and you have concept designs drawn up and you have storyboards, give them a chance to give feedback to the animator, right? Because they're the ones that can make the final decision. And I know that's a scary thing to say because we've definitely had the conversations with people who are just like, I don't want to bother them. They're so busy. I don't want to be the stick in the mud that kind of makes them stumble. But it's going to save them a lot of time on the back end. And we'll be able to come with a video that you're super proud of because from the very beginning, the person who says, that's what I want, can set our expectations on what they want. And we can move forward with good expectations. So that's really important. I also think if it's going to be animation and live action combined, whoever's going to be on set, I think that's a big deal. So if there's someone who has a lot of say in the outcome of the video, it wouldn't be a bad thing to not only see the storyboards with the animations and all the graphics that are going to be implemented into your video, but stop by on set. We can give you a chance to see what the footage is going to look like and to point out on screen that we're shooting a little wider because there's going to be animations on the side or whatever it might be. And so that gives you reassurance throughout the process as things are happening that we are making the right adjustments so that on the very back end of this in post-production, there's not the, we didn't do that. Like, oh, now we need to figure out a way to fix this problem rather than we are following the process that's been approved all along. Everything's going smoothly. And you, when you receive that video, we meet your or exceed your expectations. And it's just a lot easier for us to really wow you guys if we really know what your desires are and what your purpose is with the videos.
Yeah, I think there's a couple key people too that like when you're talking about like people who should be a part of the early conversations, like I mean, one, I know you both know that the process is super involved with our team, at least. Like we have storyboarding where you get to see the mock-ups of what the visuals are going to look like. And you get to see that, like, I'd say at least 3 times before we even head into animation. So if you're a marketer and you're like hesitating on bringing in like a C-suite or a higher level supervisor, just think about the money you're going to save them, right? Like think about what happens if we build everything and we animate it and we fulfill the contract requested. And at the end, all that work's been done and you have to pay for it. And the C-suite person sees it and they're not in love with it. It's not the direction they would have gone with. You could have caught that before it ever made it that far, right? And you could have saved them a ton of money and got things on track sooner. I can't tell you how often I see like marketers who are afraid to bring in their leadership early and then end up, with one person who's like holding a project up from being completed and costing extra money unnecessarily because they're just not happy with the way things turned out. So totally right on that front. And then I'd also say Jose and I have had experiences where the product team plays a contributing role to the content as well, and they don't get brought in as early as they should have. And when someone is a part of the like conception of a product and its image and the way it's being sold, they should certainly have a voice in the creative on something that is speaking about that product, because they're going to have an opinion on it for sure when it ends up in their lap later. So you should get ahead of it. Yeah, I think that's a great point, Adam. I would also say that, when I'm as a producer, when I collaborate with clients to figure out the cost before we even start a project, another contributing factor is like the level of creative involvement our team has. So you mentioned specifically like working with a client's internal design team, if that's something that they have, and utilizing existing assets that they might have. And that's a completely valid way to like trim cost and be efficient with it. But I would also say that writing is another contributing factor. Obviously I always encourage people to use a professional copyright, someone who understands both the nuances of, writing for the target audience, but also keeping scripts consolidated to fit the parameters of your budget. So I do think that it's helpful having a professional, but if you have internal copywriters who are doing, again, like you said, some of the like print materials or presentation materials, who are writing speeches or things like that for your business, like maybe that's someone who could be an internal resource that you pull in that helps, just keep cost efficiency, who has the comprehension of like your brand and your audience enough to tailor and cater something for that. So I do want to talk a little bit about setting expectations for timeline for an animation. And boy, is that a hard question because there's so many variables that contribute. So Jose, in your experience, you've been doing animation for a long time. Like, what do you think are the biggest challenges that contribute to a timeline adjustments or a project going extra long? Like, what are common hiccups that people don't anticipate that would cause a project to take a really long time to get done?
Everything comes down to the specifics, to really to nail down first a script, and that we all agree that what we is represented in the storyboard, that we all agree that is going to be shown in the animation. So essentially, the most common hiccup that we see so far is, as you were mentioning, Alisa, is not the right people being involved from the beginning. And at the middle of the animation, we see a different member of the team just saying, this is not looking right. And this is not looking right means, as you mentioned, Adam, probably trashed out a complete section of animation. So that hopefully, I mean, is always helpful to have all the key players involved from the earlier as possible. And the complexity I would say that also complexity of the animation can play a really good part on timing, like really setting expectation on how complex an animation could be, since simple motion graphics could have a different lifespan and time frame of 3D animation, even if they both last 30 seconds. So those two factors would be important.
So just a couple of things to keep in mind, like, yes, we have these technologies. The joke I tell is I can put a dinosaur in the background, but is it going to help the video? Right? We can do anything you want us to do. It's just cost and benefit. Like, are you getting the ROI you want? And so that again comes from early decisions. What do you want it to look like? And I think sometimes this is helpful. It's always helpful, but sometimes it's helpful just to spark the conversation. Is if you have that C-suite person that is going to be the decision maker and they are super busy, we know that they're super busy. Sometimes the best thing is to be like, next time you see a video in the next week, because we have a meeting next week, when you see a commercial or a video that you think this should feel like, send it over to us. Because then Jose and I can watch it and go, oh, this isn't live action mixed with animation. It's purely animation. Cool. I don't have to film anything for it, so they're not going to spend any money on set costs. And then maybe it's 3D animation with the transitions to graphics, right? Maybe it's character animation in 3D with graphics on screen. So that way Jose can go, all right, these are the tools I'm going to use. This is the render time potentially. This is the length they like. There's a lot that can come from an example that they're like, I want it to feel like this. And it doesn't mean it's going to look exactly like that. Obviously, it needs to fit your branding and fit your needs and fit the script and all those things. So it's not going to look exactly like whatever example you sent over, but it gives us a ton of information on what you're looking to try to do. And so that's a way to kind of work on, if you have a decision maker, that it literally is impossible for them to be in these meetings.
Yeah.
That kind of information is super important, because then we can ask you as marketing, as a head of marketing in the meetings, okay, these are the elements that we saw in the example that your C-suite sent to us. Let's talk through those examples and then figure out which one of these assets that we see in that example is going to fit best for what you're trying to accomplish. And so that affects budget in a big way, because we won't go down the wrong rabbit hole, right? So
yeah, I totally agree with that, but I would, and this is kind of a hot take, but I would almost say that I do think having examples is good, but I also think like over committing yourself to something really early in the process can be dangerous, right? Because I think you both kind of hit on the ultimately whether or not you should use animation or what style of animation you use has a lot to do with what your goals are and what your like motivation is behind creating that piece of content. And I do think that when you decide to go through an agency like ours, because there's this level of comprehension of the space and also knowledge in the creative of video production and animation, it's almost helpful to like rely on us as a resource to help as a sounding board, right? Like come to the table with like, hey, these are things I like that I think could work, but be open to discussion, because sometimes you have an idea in your head of something you really love that you want to do, but it isn't what may be the most impactful or effective, or quite frankly, to the point again, I think Jose's made with AI as well, like getting the best bang for your buck, right? Like sometimes we'll tell a client like, hey, we'd love to take your money, but we don't think that you need to do all of that. Like, here's actually what your goal is, and this is what we think you could do that would achieve that more effectively and provide you some cost efficiency, right?
Yeah, and I actually think, to your point, the reason why you're exactly right, and maybe if that C-suite person does send an example over, and then you have a meeting and you're like, we should not go this direction. That is a perfect opportunity to reach back out to the C-suite person and be like, we reviewed that and we've really talked it through. Can you be at the next meeting? Because we don't agree.
Yeah.
And we want to hear your motivations. And that would motivate them to be in that meeting, right? Because we want to hear their motivations. We want them to express to us why they want to go that direction or whatever. That's a great motivator for them to be at the meeting. And so, yeah, it helps set expectations too, right? I think a big thing is setting proper expectations. And they're like, why doesn't it look like a Marvel movie? Like, because you're selling a new piece of equipment that helps with urology. we need to hit the audience in the right place. So not that we have completely disjointed or detached clients, but understanding what your expectations are, understanding what your needs are, using our expertise to set proper expectations so that it fit your needs so that you can get an ROI on the video, I think is super, super important. And I think that's what we're all trying to do.
Yeah. Jose, would you ever say no to a job? Like, would you ever say like, no, I don't think you should do an animation?
Absolutely. I mean, there's many like different aspects. As you mentioned, Elisa, I would love to take the money, but sometimes there are things that you see ahead of time that there could be like very complicated things ahead that you probably would say that it is best to rephrase this or rethink this in another way to just into stepping ahead into animation. So definitely saying no, it's a good tool.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Sometimes saying no is the healthy thing to do for everyone. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we talked a lot about, what makes animation a good fit for certain projects, the different ways in which it could be utilized. We spoke about the cost of animation and how that gets determined, and things you can do that contribute to minimizing cost or mitigating it to make animation make sense for you. And we also spoke very transparently about, how to measure if animation's a good fit or not, and that it's okay sometimes to say it's not the right move, right? I feel like we've covered a lot. Is there any last takeaways before I chime this out? Like things that you like, either a myth that you want to bust or things that you want to make sure that healthcare marketers understand about the application of animation for their business?
On my end, I would say that I would finish with recommending to everybody that is seeing this that lean into animation and be open to that possibility that graphics, simple shapes, simple colors could probably communicate better your messaging in some cases, of course. Just to be open to the idea that this new technology and that this new tool, and now with AI even more, could be a potential solution for your needs, either for your budget limitations or for exactly your messaging that you were trying to communicate. So lean into it. So be open to it and just take the animation as a tool for you.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say is from a educational and psychological groundwork, hearing and seeing something together helps people retain information. And so if you have like a data heavy video, it's really important that they hear and see it. That's why every science poster I've ever seen has figures on it with graphs and data graphed out. That's why every presentation I've seen with every physician that's sharing their research has both graphical elements and text. And then they speak and they say the thing that you're now reading and seeing. And so animation is an incredibly powerful tool for retaining information. And so, yeah, lean into it. I think it's a really powerful, and the future with AI pushing it, it's going to be the future in communicating in video.
Yeah, I think we really hit on it, but I can't emphasize enough that one, don't let the price tag scare you before you've even seen it. Like I think a lot of marketers just have the assumption in their head that they can't afford animation or they can't afford the type of animation that they want, but you really don't know until you've sat down and consulted with, a professional who understands the space, who can help you understand, like, does this make sense here? Is there cost efficiency based on the resources I have available to me or the things I don't have available? Is this something that's going to provide better efficiency for me? It just depends on the individual project and the needs and goals of it. So take the time to sit down and consult with someone who understands that space, because they're there for that purpose, to guide you, to help you make good choices. And we want you to make good choices because we want you to keep coming back and doing more work with us. And you can only do that if your business grows and you make money and your videos are successful, right? So I would definitely say, like, don't hesitate to look at animation, and just know that especially with the implementation of AI, there's like so many ways that you can utilize it that you maybe haven't even thought about. And we talked about composited animation into live action content. We've talked about 2D, 3D, and AI generated media. Like there's so many different applications and ways to use it. Even interactive animation is something we didn't really talk about today. So hopefully in the future, we'll have episodes where we talk even more in depth about the different types of animation, the processes that are involved in that. I can't wait to talk even more about animation with this team and share that with our healthcare marketers out there who are listening. Thank you again for tuning into this episode. Make sure that you like this video, leave us a comment, let us know, what you've been considering using animation for in your business. And we'd love to help you, give you some advice, or guide you in the direction you're taking next. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, turn on your bell notifications so you don't miss upcoming episodes. We're looking forward to seeing you again and talking even more about marketing in the healthcare space. Thank you.